One of these photos was taken with a $5,000 camera setup, the other with a smartphone. Here's another look at this one's side by side. Do you think you know which camera's which? This is the Vivo X200 Pro, and it's supposed to have one of the best smartphone cameras out, and if not the best telephoto lens available on any smartphone right now. Everyone is raving about this thing, and you guys know what that means. It is time to compare it against my professional camera setups. This is the Sony a7 IV. It's the professional camera I use for all of my stills work, and I'm going to be pairing it with some of the best Sony G Master lenses like the 100 to 400 Ultra Telephoto, to see how the Vivo X200 Pro stacks up. So in terms of that comparison at the start, it was the Vivo on the left here and the Sony a7 IV on the right. I think the Vivo's actually done fantastically. Definitely a common theme for all of these comparisons is that the exposure is going to be more even on the Vivo because of the just kind of HDR nature of smartphones. They want to expose everything naturally. So here's just a load of almost like quick fire comparisons. What's something really cool on the Vivo shots, I know this is probably mainly useful for me and not particularly you guys, but is the strip at the bottom. Like, this is really, really cool. Like, it's very interesting to be able to actually instantly show the settings for all of the photos. I actually think the Vivo has performed fantastically here, to be honest. I think considering some of these environments were lower light as well, it's not like this is complete daylight. The performance was really, really strong. This shot here actually highlights one of the biggest advantages for smartphones, in my opinion, when we're talking about smartphones versus a pro camera. You can see that the difference of exposures here, because of the HDR nature of smartphones, they always want to expose everything in the scene. And you can see that on the DSLR, I had to kind of expose for the shadows, which means that subject in the middle is completely blown out. It actually goes too far on the Vivo, in my opinion. It's kind of, I would like if there was a little bit more bloom around the image, but whereas on a pro camera, you would actually need to shoot raw and edit this to get a similar type of look, or bracket and shoot multi-exposures at the same time. A smartphone is doing that for you all instantly. So Vivo has made waves for the last few years when it comes to their smartphone cameras. They partnered with Zeiss for the past few years, which is a very, very well-known optics manufacturer. They make lenses. The X200 Pro is no different. The camera has been manufactured in partnership with Zeiss yet again, and it does mean hopefully that we're going to get some beautiful clarity. The Vivo X200 Pro is rocking a 3-camera setup. It is a 50 megapixel ultra-wide lens, a 50 megapixel rear-facing lens, and a 200 megapixel telephoto. And the telephoto lens is where things get insanely interesting with this camera, because it is a periscope lens design, meaning you get optical zoom performance up from 85mm to 230mm in terms of focal range. The lens is also macro compatible, meaning you are able to get some really creative macro shots. And from a comparison with a much more expensive camera setup, like just look how large this zoom is in comparison to this little camera right here. The X200 Pro comes with 3 photo styles. I'm particularly excited about the Zeiss natural color style. This basically is a way of combating some of smartphones' habits of making everything super bright and super vivid, which actually isn't the way a professional camera tends to shoot and work. You can certainly edit a professional image to look like that, but I actually don't like the way that smartphones always enforce skies to be totally bright blue and that type of thing. There is also vivid, which I guess is the slightly more classic smartphone look, and there is a textured style as well, which I think seemingly adds a bit more contrast and pop to your images. Alright, so let's get to some telephoto comparisons here. You can see the focal range that I was kind of comparing in the bottom right hand corner. The thing which actually impressed me most of all, you can see that in this shot here, is the amount of shallow depth of field you're actually able to get on the 230mm focal range. Alright, sure, it's not obviously as much as the professional camera, but it is really good because this is something which smartphones generally really struggle with. Definitely the Vivo wanting to kind of expose things brighter, kind of normal smartphone stuff. The professional camera definitely looks a little bit more even. It certainly has a more professional look to it, but I think the Vivo is overwhelmingly impressive here. It's definitely the best telephoto on a camera that I've actually ever tested. I wanted to test some motion, so here's a little bit of driving, and again, it also really impressed me here. I also want to pair this in some lower light situations as well to see how this one does, and I'll do that in my photography review of this camera. This is actually a 200 megapixel shot, so I'm going to zoom right in on both so you can see kind of how the differences are. Obviously, bear in mind you're watching this on a 4K image, and you're not going to be getting the true resolution of these images, but things do still look fantastic. So the maximum range on my Sony that I have access to is a 400mm of reach. So how does the X200 fare when we actually crank this even further than 230mm just to get close to that 400mm range? You can actually see what I mean here. This is a little screen recording, so we've gone from the ultra wide through to the wide. This is at 10x. Now we're just zooming right in, so this is 16.5 times here. Let's take a little snap of that, and then let's really crank this in here so you can just see quite how much detail. We can actually go to 100x on this camera, which is really pretty cool. Jury's out here on performance for this one, so let me know if you'd like to see a comparison between the S24 Ultra. You can see that here, I'm not sure whether I just the camera almost missed focus, or the performance just actually is not great on the kind of far reaches zoomed in. It certainly looks like this is completely out of focus. If you compare this to the Sony shot, this one of course is completely night and day, but definitely more testing required. I think also because of the periscope design on the telephoto camera on the X200 Pro, you're actually able to get fantastic portrait mode shots at much further zoomed in focal ranges than I tend to like to shoot on my smartphones. I was really impressed with portrait mode here. I'm probably actually going to go out on a limb and say this is actually the best smartphone that I've used for portrait mode as of yet. I think the performance is absolutely fantastic. I have yet to see any kind of edge imperfections, even when I'm taking photos of things like statues, which should theoretically be harder for a smartphone camera to pick out. Obviously you're not getting an optical performance. You can see the differences here between the professional camera and the Vivo, but I think it holds up really fantastically, to be honest. I will definitely in my full reviews be kind of covering actual individual people as opposed to, these are statues. It's obviously going to be a bit different. I didn't have access to a model for this shoot, but yeah, just overwhelmingly the best portrait mode experience I've ever used on a smartphone. You do also have access to some kind of creative bokeh controls on the Vivo. Jury's out on this. I am not a massive fan so far. I think they end up looking really artificial and fake, and when the actual portrait mode is so good, I would just stick to that. A mode which I was shooting a lot when I was shooting this comparison is the street photography mode on the Vivo X200 Pro. It's actually a really, really fun way to shoot. It almost feels like you're using a slightly more professional camera than you are just using your smartphone. So in order to access this, you just swipe up from the bottom. You can already see here that you get they're kind of trying to emulate the way a physical camera would actually look and work. You get a number of fixed focal ranges and nothing in between. This is a really useful feature for me personally because it means you're not going to be shooting images at say you were wanting to shoot at 1x, you're not actually accidentally on 1.2x or something like that. And you have access to a number of quick settings at the top that give you more manual control over your camera. In this comparison, I've mainly focused on photos and stills as opposed to video, but definitely let me know with a comment down below whether you guys would be keen to see a video comparison between a more expensive video camera, like for instance my Sony FX3, which is shooting me right now, and the camera on the X200 Pro. What's also a really cool feature is that the periscope camera, the telephoto on this smartphone, is actually super macro enabled, meaning you're able to get really creative macro shots that are actually significantly better than the ultra wide macro style used on most smartphones. Here's just a quick example of that, and I will again go into more detail about this in the full review, but here is a Vivo shot and here is a Sony shot, and then here's an example of those zoomed in to kind of almost just fill the frame so you can have an example. I think this one actually is the biggest illustration of the difference in performance. This isn't a macro lens that I'm using on the Sony. I'm just shooting right in nearly at 400mm in terms of focal range, so I'm able to get quite close. That's the reason also you're getting a really nice roll off of focus. Not quite the same performance, definitely some needing of testing on the Vivo. I mean, obviously it would be incredible if it was able to get a similar level of performance, but yeah, certainly a useful feature to have. I don't know about you guys, I think this has been so interesting. I was actually thoroughly impressed with the X200 Pro. It is a fantastic smartphone camera. Do me a favor, drop a comment down below in the comment section of this video. Let me know what cameras or phones you want me to compare this beast of a smartphone camera to in the next few days.